The morning began quietly, with soft rain tapping against the windows of Emily Carter's neat suburban house in Seattle. Her husband Daniel had left for a week-long business trip to Chicago, and the silence that filled their home felt heavier than usual. Emily was used to Daniel's busy schedule flights, meetings, late-night calls, but every time he left, the emptiness of the house seemed to grow a little deeper. She tried to distract herself with work, arranging color swatches and floor plans across the kitchen table. Emily worked as an interior designer for a small but rising design firm owned by Mark Evans, a man she deeply respected. Mark was in his late 30s, confident, calm, and precise in everything he did. He had a way of speaking that made people feel capable, and that was something Emily admired. She enjoyed working for him. His feedback was honest, and he always pushed her to see her own talent. But lately, she had noticed a subtle change, something quiet in the way he looked at her during meetings, or how his compliments felt a little more personal than before. Around noon, her phone buzzed. 'Twas Mark. "Hey, Emily," he said in his usual even tone. "The client loved your proposal. I'd like to go over a few details in person, if you're home." She hesitated, glancing around the house. It wasn't messy, but she hadn't expected company. Still, she didn't want to say no. "Sure," she replied. "I'm home all day." "Perfect," he said. "I'll be there in 30. Emily quickly tidied the living room, brushed her hair, and set out a few of her sketches on the table. She told herself it was just work, nothing more. But when the doorbell rang, her pulse quickened for reasons she couldn't explain. Mark stood at the door, rain glistening on his dark coat, a warm smile on his face. In his hands, he held 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this," he said lightly as he stepped inside. The air smelled of rain and roasted beans, and for a brief second, their eyes met longer than usual. "Thanks," she said softly, taking the cup. "You didn't have to." "I know," he replied, "but I wanted to." They settled at the kitchen table, papers spread out between them. The rain outside grew heavier, wrapping the house in a gentle hum. They spoke about design choices and color tones, yet the conversation flowed more easily than it usually did at the office. Mark was relaxed, here, his jacket off, sleeves rolled up, leaning slightly closer as they reviewed her sketches. "You have a gift, Emily," he said, studying one of her drawings. "You'll make spaces feel warm and alive. It's not something you can teach." She smiled, touched by the sincerity in his voice. "Thank you. I just try to make things feel like home." He looked at her for a moment before replying. "Maybe that's what makes your work so different." Something in the way he said it made her heart skip. She tried to focus on the sketches again, but her thoughts wandered. Daniel had never really talked to her like that. He loved her, yes, but he was often distracted, caught up in his own world of business calls and deadlines. Mark, on the other hand, seemed to see the things she hid, the loneliness behind her smile, the quiet effort she put into everything she did. A flash of lightning lit up the room, followed by a low rumble of thunder. The power flickered once, then went out completely, plunging the house into dim light. Emily gasped softly. "Looks like we've lost power," she said, standing up. Mark followed her into the living room. "Do you have candles?" "In the drawer," she said, moving quickly. She found a few small candles and lit them. The soft glow spread across the room, painting everything in a warm golden hue. Mark smiled faintly. "Cozy almost feels like we planned it." Emily laughed nervously, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "If we did, I'd have baked something too." They both laughed, and for a moment it felt easy. The storm outside made the house feel smaller, more intimate. The candlelight flickered over Mark's face as he leaned against the counter, watching her. "You really live your work," he said quietly. "Your home feels exactly like your designswarm.com/thoughtful." "Thank you," she said, feeling a strange wave of gratitude. "I guess I like places that make people feel safe." He nodded. "We all need that." There was something in his tone of softness that pulled at her. She looked up, and their eyes met again. Neither of them spoke for a few seconds. The air, Felt charged but not uncomfortable, just heavy with everything they weren't saying. Emily looked away first, clearing her throat. So, about the project. Mark smiled gently. Right? The project. He stepped closer, pointing at one of the sketches on the table. Do you see this part here? I think the client will love that detail. You've got a sense for what people want before they even know it. His compliment hung in the air longer than it should have. Emily's heart beat faster, though she didn't know why. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. The sincerity in his voice, the quiet way his eyes softened as he spoke. Outside, the rain began to ease. The thunder faded into a distant hum. But the silence that filled the house now felt heavier than before. Mark gathered his notes, slipping them into his folder. I should head out before it gets dark, he said finally. She nodded. Of course. Thanks for stopping by. He hesitated near the door. Emily, he said, turning back to face her. You've got a real talent. Don't doubt yourself. Okay? He paused, his voice quieter now. Don't let anyone make you feel unseen. Her breath caught. The words struck deeper than he could have known. Thank you, Mark, she said softly. That means a lot. He gave her a small, understanding smile. It's just the truth. Then he stepped out into the rain, his figure fading into the gray evening. Emily closed the door and leaned against it, her heart thudding softly. She didn't fully understand what had just happened. It wasn't romantic, not really, but it wasn't just work either. There had been something between them, something unspoken and undeniable. As the rain slowed to a drizzle, she walked back to the kitchen. The candles still burned quietly, their light flickering across her sketches. She picked up the coffee cup he had left behind, still half full, and stared at it for a long time. Outside, the clouds began to break apart, letting a faint glow of sunset filter through. Emily stood by the window, watching it, lost in thought. For the first time in a long while, she felt awake, like she had noticed something in herself she hadn't seen before. It wasn't about Mark, not entirely. It was about the feeling he had stirred in her, a reminder that she was still someone who could be seen, heard, and appreciated. But as the light faded completely, and the quiet of the house settled around her again, Emily couldn't shake one thought from her mind. Everything had changed, and she didn't know how or why. But deep down, she knew the moment wasn't over. It was only the beginning. The next day, the storm still hovered over Seattle, gray clouds hanging low as if refusing to leave. Emily woke to the sound of soft rain, her mind still replaying the moment when Mark had stood in her kitchen and told her she was strong, that she shouldn't let anyone make her feel unseen. Those words had stayed with her through the night, circling in her thoughts like the sound of rain on the roof. She made coffee and tried to focus on work, opening her laptop to finish the client presentation. But she couldn't concentrate. Every few minutes, her eyes drifted to the chair across the table, the one Mark had sat in. It was strange how something so simple could feel so heavy. He hadn't done anything wrong. Neither of them had. But something had shifted. The silence of the house now felt filled with his presence. With the warmth he had left behind, around noon, her phone buzzed again. It was Mark. Hey, he said casually, just checking in. Did the power come back on? Yes, she replied quickly, maybe too quickly. It came on an hour after you left. That's good, he said. I was worried you'd be stuck in the dark. Emily smiled, despite herself. No, I survived. He chuckled softly on the other end. Then, after a pause, he said, Listen, I have some updates on the client's feedback. I could swing by later this afternoon if that works. For a moment, Emily hesitated. She could easily have said no. They could discuss it over email, but something inside her wanted to see him again. Sure, she said, trying to sound neutral. Come by whenever you can. By the time he arrived, the rain had picked up again. Mark stepped inside, brushing water from his coat. His smile easy, but his eyes holding something deeper, something quiet. Restrained. I promise this won't take long, he said. Setting his folder down. It's fine, Emily said, her heart already racing faster than it should. They went through the client notes. talking about design changes and layout plans. It was professional, yet the energy between them felt different, now unspoken but alive. Every time their hands brushed over the same paper, a faint tension filled the air. At one point, lightning flashed again, followed by a sharp crack of thunder. Emily flinched slightly. "You really don't like storms, do you?" Mark said gently. "They make me uneasy," she admitted, "especially when I'm alone." He looked at her for a moment, his voice softer when he spoke. "You shouldn't have to feel alone." That one sentence broke through her guard. She didn't reply, just stared down at the papers, pretending to read. But her mind was miles away, thinking about how Daniel had missed their last anniversary because of a flight delay. How most of their conversations lately had been about logistics, not love. Mark must have sensed her silence. "Sorry," he said. That was out of line. She said quickly, "It's okay. You didn't say anything wrong." For a few seconds, they sat quietly, the sound of rain filling the space between them. It wasn't awkward, just full. Full of things neither of them dared to say. To change the subject, Emily stood up. "Do you want something to drink? Coffee? Tea?" "Coffee would be great," he said, as she moved around the kitchen. He watched her quietly, not out of admiration, but something more thoughtful-like. He was trying to understand her. Emily noticed but pretended she didn't. She handed him the cup and their fingers brushed lightly. It was a small touch, but it sent a wave through her that she couldn't explain. Mark smiled faintly. "Maybe feeling the same confusion. You know," he said after a while, "I think sometimes people forget to take care of themselves when they're too busy taking care of everything else." Emily looked at him, unsure how to respond. "Are you talking about me?" He shrugged, smiling slightly. "If it fits." She laughed softly, but her heart ached at how right he was. She had spent so long being responsible, being the one who waited, who understood, who stayed patient while Daniel's work always came first. She loved her husband, but love had turned into routine, and routine had turned into silence. The storm outside began to ease again, and the fading light made the room glow softly. It felt peaceful, almost like time had slowed. Mark glanced at his watch but didn't move. "I should probably go soon," he said, though his tone didn't sound convinced. Emily nodded. "Of course." But neither of them stood up. Instead, they sat in that quiet stillness, the kind that felt more like confession than conversation. Finally, Mark said, "You know what I admire about you? You notice details others don't. Not just in design, but in people. That's rare." She looked up, caught off guard by his sincerity. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means a lot." Key smiled, eyes gentle. "It's just the truth." For a moment, their gazes held, and Emily felt something shift against something deep and unspoken. It wasn't love, but it was recognition. The feeling of being seen for the first time in a long while. Mark cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "All right, I really should head out before it gets worse out there." Emily walked him to the door. The wind had picked up again, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine. He turned back to face her, one hand on the doorknob. "Emily," he said quietly, "don't lose that spark you have. The one that makes people feel something. It's Rerand. It's yours." She smiled faintly. "You always say the right thing, don't you?" He shook his head. "Not always. Just when it matters." He gave her a small nod, then stepped outside into the rain. She stood at the doorway watching as he walked to his car, the sound of the rain mixing with the faint hum of distant thunder. When his car disappeared down the street, she closed the door slowly. Leaning against it the same way she had the day before, the house felt quiet again, but not empty this time. It was as if his words had stayed behind, filling the spaces he had left. She went to the window and watched the rain fade into mist. Her heart felt strange, half guilty, half alive. She knew she hadn't done anything wrong. Neither had he. But something had awakened in her, something that had been asleep for too long. As night fell, Emily sat on the couch, holding her coffee cup and staring at the flickering streetlight outside. She thought about Daniel, about the years they had built together, and about how far apart they had quietly drifted without meaning to. She didn't know what this feeling for Mark meant, or if it even was a feeling at all. Maybe it was just the reflection of everything she'd been missing: attention, understanding, someone who noticed. When the rain finally stopped, Emily whispered to herself, "It's just a storm. It will pass." But deep down, she knew this one wouldn't fade as easily as the others. This one had settled inside her, soft, steady, and unforgettable. 2 days passed, but Emily couldn't get Mark out of her mind. His words replayed again and again. "You shouldn't have to feel alone."
Ah.
She tried to lose herself in work, but everything reminded her of him: the sound of rain, the smell of coffee, even the soft light that filled her living room in the evenings. It wasn't obsession. It was confusion. She felt drawn to something she didn't understand, and the more she tried to ignore it, stronger it grew. Daniel called that morning from Chicago. His voice was cheerful but distant, full of talk about meetings and business dinners. "I might need to stay an extra day," he said. "The client wants a follow-up session." Emily smiled weakly. "That's fine. Take your time." He thanked her quickly, promised to call later, and hung up. She stared at her phone for a while, realizing that they had spoken for less than 5 minutes. That used to be enough, but lately, it felt like they lived in different worlds, parallel lives that no longer touched. That afternoon, while she was rearranging samples for her next project, her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Mark. "Need to discuss one small detail from yesterday's plans. Mind if I stop by for a few minutes?" Her heart skipped. She stared at the screen, trying to decide if it was a good idea, but her fingers typed before her mind could stop them. "Sure, come by any time after 5. When he arrived, the rain had finally cleared. The evening light poured through her windows, soft and golden, painting everything in calm shades of orange. Mark looked different out of the storm, less guarded, more open. "I won't take long," said with a polite smile, holding up his tablet. "Just wanted to show you the client's final notes." They sat close at the table, reviewing the designs, but neither of them was focused. The conversation stumbled, lost between words they didn't need to say. After a few minutes, Mark closed the tablet and looked at her. "Emily," he said quietly, "can I ask you something? And I promise it's not about work." She hesitated, her voice barely a whisper. "Okay." He took a slow breath. "Do you ever feel like you're living the right life, but still missing something?" His question cut through her like glass. She looked down at the table, fingers trembling slightly. "Every day," she said, honestly. Mark nodded, his eyes soft but serious. "I thought so." She lifted her head, meeting his gaze. "Why do you say that?" "Because you remind me of someone who's always holding everything together for everyone else, but forgetting herself." His words hit her harder than she expected. Her throat tightened. For months, maybe years, she had been pretending everything was fine, smiling through silence, telling herself that Daniel's distance was normal. But now, in this quiet house, she couldn't pretend anymore. "Mark," she began, but he interrupted gently. "You don't have to explain. I just want you to know that I see it. I see you." The room fell silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the fridge and the ticking of the clock. Emily's eyes filled with tears she didn't want to shed. She wasn't sure if it was guilt or relief. "You shouldn't say things like that," she whispered. "I know," he said softly, "but it's the truth." She stood up, pacing slowly toward the window. The light outside was fading, turning the sky a dusky pink. "You're my boss," she said, her voice shaking. "This shouldn't even be happening." He stayed seated, calm and respectful. "I'm not trying to cross a line," he said. "I just needed to be honest. Yesterday, when I left your house, I realized something. I care about you not as an employee, but as a person. And I hate seeing you hide behind polite smiles." Emily turned to face him. Her eyes were wet now. "You have no idea how much those words mean," she said. "But they scare me too." Mark stood then, his voice still gentle. "I get that. Believe me, I'm scared too." They stood across from each other, the air thick with everything they couldn't say. There was no touching, No dramatic gesture, just two people standing in the middle of a truth that neither of them had planned to face. "I love my husband," she said finally, her voice breaking. "He's a good man, but sometimes I feel invisible next to him." Mark nodded slowly. "You're not invisible, Emily. Not to me." Her chest tightened at his words. She wiped her eyes quickly, embarrassed. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not," he said. "That's the problem. None of this is simple." They both fell quiet again. The sunlight faded completely now, replaced by the first traces of evening. Emily could see his reflection in the window, glass-tired, conflicted, human. She turned back toward him, her voice softer now. "If I told you I feel something too, would that make things worse?" Mark smiled sadly. "Probably, but I'd rather know the truth than spend the rest of my life wondering." Tears rolled down her cheeks then, silent and unforced. "I don't want to hurt anyone," she said. "You're not," he replied gently. "We haven't done anything wrong. Sometimes connection just happens. It doesn't have to be acted on to be real." She nodded, understanding what he meant. What they shared wasn't about romance, it was about recognition. Two lonely hearts finding comfort in honesty. Even if it couldn't go further, Mark stepped closer, still keeping his distance. "I should go," he said softly, "before we make this harder than it already is." Emily wanted to ask him to stay, to keep talking, but she knew he was right. "Okay," she whispered. He reached for his coat, pausing at the door. "Emily," he said quietly, "thank you for letting me be honest. Most people don't." She managed a weak smile. "Thank you for not pretending." He gave a small nod, then walked out into the cool evening air. The door closed gently behind him, leaving Emily standing there in the quiet. For a long time, she didn't move. She could still feel the weight of his words, still see the sincerity in his eyes. There had been no betrayal, no wrong step, just to people who had accidentally seen too much of each other's truth. She sat down slowly, her mind spinning. The guilt was there, yes, but so was something else, a strange kind of peace. For the first time in years, someone had said the things she had never dared to admit out loud. As night deepened, she walked to the window and looked out at the city lights blinking in the distance. Somewhere out there, Mark was probably driving home, thinking the same thoughts, feeling the same ache. Emily whispered into the quiet room, "Sometimes doing the right thing hurts the most." She turned off the lights and went upstairs, feeling both heavy and light at the same time. Nothing had happened, yet everything had changed. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew this night would stay with her forever. And somewhere deep inside, she hoped he knew that too. Daniel returned 3 days later, his suitcase rolling across the hardwood floor, his voice loud and cheerful as always. "Emily, I'm home," he called, smiling as if nothing in the world had changed. And in many ways, nothing had, least not on the surface. But Emily felt it the moment she saw him. Something deep inside her had shifted. And though she smiled, hugged him, and asked about his trip, her heart carried a quiet heaviness that he couldn't see. That evening, they had dinner together, just like old times. Daniel talked about his meetings, the new deal he'd closed, and how he'd met an old college friend by chance. Emily listened patiently, nodding, adding soft responses now and then, but her mind drifted. She noticed how little space there was for silence between them, how every moment was filled with facts instead of feelings. She tried to bring herself fully into the moment, but it was hard. Mark's voice, soft and honest, still echoed in her memory. "Don't let anyone make you feel unseen." After dinner, Daniel unpacked in the bedroom while Emily washed dishes. She looked out the kitchen window, watching the streetlights flicker across the wet pavement. Her house felt different, now familiar, but no longer comforting. It was as if she had outgrown the silence she once accepted. She didn't feel angry or restless, just quietly aware of what she'd been missing. Later that night, Daniel sat beside her on the couch. "You've been quiet," he said gently. "Everything okay?" Emily smiled, forcing calm into her voice. "Just tired, that's all. Work's been busy." He nodded, already half distracted by his phone. "I can imagine." You work too hard sometimes." She almost laughed, not out of amusement, but because of how icily he said it. She wanted to tell him how she'd felt the past week, the storm, the loneliness, the strange, impossible connection with her boss, but the words wouldn't come. How could she explain something that had no name? Instead, she said softly, "Do you ever feel like we don't talk anymore? I mean, not really talk." Daniel looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" "We're talking now." She gave a faint smile. "Yeah, but about real things. About us." He hesitated, clearly unsure how to respond. "I didn't know something was wrong," he said finally. "It's not wrong," she said. "It's just quiet." He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I know I've been busy. I'm trying to make things better for us. You know that." "I do," she said truthfully, "and I appreciate it. I just miss the way we used to be." He nodded, kissed her forehead, and promised they'd take a weekend trip soon. The gesture was kind, but Emily felt that he still didn't fully understand. Maybe he couldn't. Still, she wanted to believe they could find their way back. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains. Daniel left early for another meeting, leaving her with a quick kiss and a cheerful, "Don't wait up for me." The door closed, and once again. The house was quiet. Emily made herself coffee and sat by the kitchen window, trying to start her day. That's when she noticed an envelope on the porch, a plain white one, slightly damp from the morning dew. She stepped outside, the air crisp and cool, and picked it up. Her name was written in neat handwriting across the front. Her heart gave a small, startled flutter. She knew that handwriting. Inside was a short note. "You reminded me what honesty feels like. Thank you for that." Emily read it twice, maybe 3 times, her throat tightening. It wasn't a love letter. It wasn't a goodbye. It was something simpler and purer. Note of respect. A quiet acknowledgement that what had happened between them mattered, even if it could never be more. She folded the note carefully and placed it in her desk drawer. Not out of secrecy, but because it felt like something private and sacred. Then she sat down, staring at the morning light dancing on the walls. She realized that Mark had given her something she hadn't even known she needed. A moment of truth. It wasn't about him. It was about her. About remembering who she was before life got too busy. Before she started shrinking herself to fit the quiet spaces left by someone else's absence. Over the next few weeks, Emily started to change, subtly but surely. She began to speak more openly with Daniel, telling him when she felt unheard. Asking him about his thoughts and dreams, not just his schedule. At first, he seemed surprised, even unsure how to respond. But slowly, he began to meet her halfway. He started leaving his phone aside at dinner. Started noticing small things again, like the way she smiled when she talked about a new project. Or how her laugh filled the kitchen when something funny happened on TV. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Emily didn't tell him about Mark's visit or the note. Some things, she realized, didn't need to be shared to be understood. What mattered was that the silence between them was finally breaking. One evening, Daniel came home early, holding a small bouquet of lily, her favorite. "Thought we could have dinner together," he said, smiling. Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was simple, genuine, and exactly what she needed. "I'd like that," she said, as they ate. She thought about how strange life could be, how someone could enter it for just a brief moment and still leave behind something lasting. Later that night, after Daniel had fallen asleep, Emily sat by the window, looking at the moonlight spilling over the garden. The world outside was calm now. The storm, both outside and within her, had finally passed. She reached into the drawer, took out Mark's note, and read it one last time. Then she smiled, a small, quiet smile filled with peace. He had done the right thing. They both had, because sometimes the bravest act of love is restraint, a choice to walk away when it would be easier not to. Emily folded the note again, placed it back in the drawer, and whispered into the still night, "Thank you." The next morning she woke with a new sense of calm. She made breakfast, hummed softly to herself, and noticed how the sunlight poured through the kitchen window. Brighter than before. It wasn't that life had magically changed, but she had. She was no longer waiting for someone else to notice her. She was learning to notice herself, to find joy in small things, to speak her truth, and to believe that love, even in its quietest form, could still heal. A few days later, she received an email from Mark, short and professional. It was about a new project. Nothing personal, no hidden message. But at the end, he'd added one simple line: "Your last design was beautiful, as always. Hope you're doing well." Amelie smiled, typed a short reply, warm, polite. And Candan then closed her laptop as she stood by the window. Watching the sky turn pink with sunrise, she realized something profound. What had happened in those quiet days wasn't a love story in the traditional sense. It was a story of rediscovery of two people who crossed paths to remind each other what truth, honesty, and kindness could look like. And though Mark was gone, a part of his lessons stayed with her forever. She looked around her home, the same house that once felt lonely, and for the first time, it truly felt alive again. Emily whispered, half to herself and half to the memory of what had been. He did the right thing, right here in my house. Then she took a deep breath, smiled, and began her day, ready at last to live fully in the life that was already hers.